Hello, welcome again to Sport Unlocked, going through all the week's sports news with me, Rob Harris from Sky News, Martyn Ziegler from The Times, and Tariq Panja from The New York Times. Martyn, what a trip it was to Hamburg for you for the Euros finals draw. So you're sitting in the room thinking, oh, this is going to be one of those routine, mundane draws?
Yeah, and sort of strange noises started coming through the speaker system, sort of disconcerting both the sort of people who were doing the draw, Steve McManaman, David Silva, Giorgio Marchetti, the UEFA Deputy General Secretary. They kept going, but these noises were of an erotic nature, and it turned out it was the prankster. The guy who's claiming responsibility is the same person who did the same thing at the with the BBC's coverage of an FA Cup match involving Liverpool and Wolverhampton Wanderers. For the German security people, it's a bit of an embarrassing security breach because it looks like he got into the venue the day before during the rehearsals, and I mean there was strong security by the Germans there, except the day before. I mean that's bad.
Well, fair play to him. He sounds like a man who can get things done. He's more organised than the organiser of these events, so maybe there's a future job offer waiting in the wings for this chap, Martyn.
Yeah, like one of those computer hackers, he gets taken on board to devise ways of stopping computer hacking. Perhaps he's going to be a millionaire.
And we had Giorgio Marchetti on stage having to try to find a way of dealing with the unexpected.
Is he Deputy Secretary General? Yeah, I thought he kept his cool pretty well. They just sort of talked over it eventually. When the BBC happened, there was Gary Lineker and was laughing about it and stuff like that. The UEFA and the other people just ignoring it.
Ever the pro Giorgio. I think the words he described, there is a funny noise.
UEFA actually did have quite an exciting week in the Women's Nations League, big as we saw with the introduction of the men's competition a few years ago. Some perhaps less familiar with the launch of this, and then we got that exciting end with England and Netherlands group and all that qualification. But it wasn't just exciting, it threw up all sorts of integrity issues as well.
Yeah, strange one this. England playing Scotland, and the kind of goal difference was going to be crucial into whether they would qualify for the Olympics. But obviously England, Scotland both play for the British Olympic team. So you can argue that actually it meant that it made sense for the Scottish to try and lose by a high margin, which they did, 6-0. But actually, before the match, I was speaking to people in the Scottish and Welsh FA, and they're very anti the Olympics anyway. So I think they will have been trying their hardest anyway, because they don't like it because their players don't get in. It's a bit embarrassing. They say it doesn't do anything for driving participation in their countries. So I think they escape the integrity inspector this time.
And this can sound particularly odd, very British for those listening around the world. The only time Britain competes in football as Britain is at the Olympics, and only when there could be an agreement between the home nations and FIFA. So there isn't one over the men's team, is there, which would have to qualify through the England under-21s performances, but they do have one through the women's game, but then it has to be England that secures qualification. Then at Team GB level, all four home nations could compete at the Olympics, but in this case, England didn't secure their qualification. But if the old system had been used and it was qualification through the Women's World Cup, then they would have got their place in Paris. And adding to that drama, as you're saying, going into stoppage time in the games on Tuesday night, it looked like England had done enough. They scored a sixth goal, but then the Netherlands immediately in their game scored a fourth goal. So a dramatic end.
One of those things where it went from delight and joy for England to sort of despair. But hey, that's sport.
And Tariq, in Brazil, what a week of football there to end the season.
Dramatic end there as well. Well, a very, very slow face plant from Botafogo. That Rio team was surging ahead for most of the season, 13 points ahead, owned by multi-club investor John Textor. He has a bit of Palace, bit of owns Lyon as well in France, another team haunted by relegation, unfortunately. And they have squandered that 13-point lead with 5 games to go. It's incredible, that collapse. Didn't win in the last 5. Lost to the eventual champion Palmeiras 5 games ago. And that had John Textor on the field, screaming into cameras, calling out the Brazilian league as being corrupt, having a complete meltdown, asking to be punished by the league, and guess what? He was. And then since then, the team didn't win another game and finished, I think, 4th. Palmeiras, giant team from Sao Paulo, ended up winning the league. A really interesting competition this year for the other side of the table as well. Pele's former team, Santos, being relegated for the first time. That's the team that, Pele and that the greats from the late 60s, 70s were traveling around the world. They were so good, playing everyone and anyone. Big European tour. They're going down. Also formed Neymar and Rubinho, huge Brazilian team. Big story that. Kind of incredible to see Santos fall. So yeah, very exciting end to the Brazilian league, which will have a City Football Group owned team in the top flight again, with Bahia staying up thanks to a win against Atletico Mineiro. Great news for Sheikh Mansour, who was busy this week meeting Vladimir Putin.
And Vladimir Putin met another Premier League owner too this week.
Really? Burnley's Alan Pace, was it?
Not quite. Mohammed bin Salman, although is he a Premier League owner?
That's a good question. Probably not officially, but he is the head of the Saudi Public Investment Fund, which owns Newcastle United. So by default, perhaps.
Legally binding assurances, of course, from the Premier League that the Saudi state, Mohammed bin Salman, will have no effect on that club. But it does raise an interesting point. I was thinking about this. Roman Abramovich, the Chelsea owner, effectively got kicked out of the UK for his business relationship alliance with Vladimir Putin following the invasion of Ukraine. Now you have these Gulf potentates rolling out the red carpet, and only that, giving magisterial air show in welcoming Vladimir Putin, that air show in the colours of the Russian flag and everything else. And clearly doing business between these two countries. They, depending which way you want to slice it, own 2 Premier League football clubs too, if you like. What's the line here?
Well, was the issue in England the fact that individual like Abramovich was sanctioned, that sort of forced the Premier League's hands? But as we have discussed before, the Premier League did embroil itself in the politics of the war, particularly with the show of displays with solidarity with Ukraine. And even this week, we had people on social media contrasting the image of Sheikh Mansour meeting Vladimir Putin and those no war Ukraine flag banners at the Etihad.
Yeah, it's quite right. You're right, Rob. He was sanctioned, and that's the result of that. But it does raise the point about if states or if people close to countries own our Premier League teams in England, and then the relationship between countries deteriorates to an extent they become persona non grata or country non grata, if you want. What then happens? It's that question of whether states or people linked to states should own, heritage items like Premier League football clubs.
Yeah, the whole state ownership thing is a very, very tricky one. But obviously, individuals can buy Premier League clubs and pretend they're not part of the state, even though they effectively are. So, even if you brought in a ban on state ownership, I think it's quite difficult to implement.
As we've seen, states can take over, it seems, complete competitions in some way in football. Busy week for Mohammed bin Salman. How invested do you think he was in the Asian Champions League decision? Now, imagine if, say in Europe, the European Champions League every year went to the same place for the final, but not just the final, but the semi-finals and the quarter-finals. Well, that's what's going to happen soon until 2029, isn't it? A 5-year agreement that just came out of nowhere.
Yet more for Saudi Arabia.
It's quite incredible, to be honest. It's not just that the fact it's been there, the decision-making process in Asian football. It just seems, we've talked about how opaque football is and sports governance is more broadly, but Asian football, under Sheikh Salman of Bahrain, the longest-serving regional football head, is just such a closed box, and these announcements get made. And this is an entire new tournament, essentially, going to Saudi Arabia. There's going to be, a multi-team event year after year for 5 straight years in that one country. It's fascinating and also odd, Martyn.
Not so fast. It's only going to be there for 2 years, and then they're going to review it to make sure that everything is fine. So I think do you think there's a serious risk that it won't stay for the full 5 years?
Who's going to conduct that review?
No.
Sheikh Salman.
So immediately after that vote, if you remember, by the FIFA Council that cooked up a deal for Saudi for 2034, the Asian Confederation and Sheikh Salman immediately put a statement out backing it, even though Australia was still thinking about it, at least then.
And it is easier. Within half an hour, and the all of Asian football is unanimous in its support of this one bid. That was news to some of the Asian members who are considering bidding for the competition. And it just tells you how business is done maybe in that confederation.
Sheikh Salman, he was seen as favourite to be the FIFA president after Sepp Blatter, wasn't he? I mean, he was actually beaten by Infantino. Maybe, he's not doing much to show that he was, to me anyway, that he should have won that competition. For example, this decision on the Asian Champions League, I don't even know. I mean, was this an executive board decision? Was there a meeting about it? I think it was just announced, wasn't it? I mean, I don't even know if there was a vote on it. It just seems strange.
Surely something so consequential, you need to put it out to at least the sense of an open process.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's not only that it's going where it's going to be, it's the reformatting of the event. It seems similar, Rob. You were in Lisbon during COVID, I think. You went to cover that Champions League tournament, the Final 8, I think it was called, and it was held in Portugal because of COVID, etc. There was some consideration whether UEFA might go down that road if it was. How do you remember that tournament, Rob? Those one-off knockout games, probably with few in attendance, if any, I guess.
Yeah, the only attendance really was the media. And I think it was sort of seen as more exciting because of the way the quarterfinals panned out. So that was the first real introduction to these single leg matches. So, we had Leipzig beating Atletico Madrid 2-1, PSG only just beating Atalanta 2-1, Man City losing to Lyon 3-1, and Bayern Munich's 8-2 thumping of Barcelona. So I think that really got people excited for this format. Then we had the semi-finals, which were 3-0 victories for both PSG and Bayern before the narrow victory for Bayern over PSG in the final. So perhaps many people's views of the format were shaped by the quarterfinals as seeing this as the perhaps great way of doing things in future, but challenges if you did have fans and getting 4 clubs at least of fans into one city or a couple of cities close by in that final week, and then some fans not knowing if they'd be staying or going back.
Good news for Saudi Arabia, who are desperate to get all of these events, whether it's football, golf, boxing or World Cups. All roads seem to be leading there.
I did joke a few weeks ago about Saudi Arabia should join the Commonwealth and host the Commonwealth Games. But now we've seen the Gold Coast pull out of hosting 2026. There's no obvious host. The British government won't step in again. It stepped in last time to rescue them because Durban couldn't host, so Birmingham stepped in. And it's now, where is it going to be? And I think there's a real danger now it's going to be completely broken up, and the Commonwealth Games as we know it is not going to happen anymore. But that might be the right thing. Maybe it's it's past its use by date.
An event that started out as the Empire Games, now with the remnants of the British Empire, part of the Commonwealth, and within a busy sporting year, just what place does it have? Well, for athletes who perhaps might not qualify for the Olympics, it gives them an international event where they can win medals. It might help towards sponsorships, but certainly you'd think it's got a diminished status as an event. I mean, maybe it's just me. I can't remember much that happened at the Birmingham 2022 games.
No, it seems very much a consolation cup, if you want, for those athletes. And, elite sporting events, there is a reason why they're called elite sporting events. Sadly, if you're not good enough to get to those, perhaps spending hundreds of millions of dollars for something that is marginal at best probably isn't the right way of spending money. And also think about the climatic costs. We're talking about climate change, week of COP28, environmental questions that the world is asking. Do you need another mega event that no one cares about, which involves ferrying athletes across the world?
It can mean something to the local populations, but maybe one solution, I've mentioned it before on this pod certainly, is the 24-hour games. So you could just split events into different places. You don't need to build complete athlete villages because you spread the athletes in multiple countries, and it gives you a sort of 24-hour swathe of live broadcast by hosting different sports in different countries.
Yeah, perhaps.
I think the Commonwealth Games Federation might have been listening to you, Rob, because my colleague Matt Lawton has reported today saying that the sort of Plan B discussions are that to split it up, so you have like a series of different championships for different sports, so it eases the financial burden. So maybe it's going to be called the Rob Harris Commonwealth Games.
So these events will be championships in various sports, but not world championships, but Commonwealth championships.
Yeah.
Really, who cares?
Well, that's what you can say that about the Commonwealth Games as it is.
Yes.
So that's a problem, isn't it? But,
guys, just moving on to something here. I mentioned sort of climate and COP28 in Dubai at the moment. There was a sporting personality there, Gianni Infantino, the FIFA president. We went to COP. I believe he flew on a private jet to get there, just to underline FIFA and his commitment to climate change. We saw on his Instagram more his commitment to meeting famous people. There was the handshake with Prince Charles, hug with Lula from Brazil, all sorts of other dignitaries. It's really weird for me. You guys can maybe be devil's advocate, but this comes 2 weeks after FIFA announced the 2030 World Cup, bloated event on 3 continents with 3 games in South America before moving to Europe and Africa. 48 team World Cups now. It just felt a bit weird to me.
I suppose it reflects the extremes in the climate debate, which is, do you stop all holidays abroad, or do you try to find mitigations and making it more environmentally sustainable? Do you stop all sporting travel for global tours and for fans going around the world, or do you try to find ways of making it more sustainable? And for this COP, Gianni Infantino certainly isn't the only person who's attended who you would wonder what perhaps they're doing there. It does seem to be a gathering of some of the great and the good, so many sort of sideline conferences and sessions and seminars, which is all sort of very well-meaning, you'd think, in terms of the panels, but you wonder, what is it all achieving, particularly, against the backdrop of all this, without getting into the technicalities of climate policy, what we've had the head of COP talking up, haven't we, fossil fuels in some way?
Rob, I suppose he would, because he's also the chairman of the United Arab Emirates Petroleum Company. So, he's doing his job. It has been an odd event, but we're a sports podcast, and that's why, our focus is on sporting figures. And it did strike me as odd that Gianni Infantino was there, and given the backdrop to his travels and FIFA's current decision making.
And to me, something that stands out is we haven't been told what Gianni Infantino went there for. apart from to show solidarity with the climate cause. We haven't been told if he particularly raised certain things with national leaders that he wanted them to do to make football more sustainable, or something he was suggesting FIFA would do to help the environment. It just looked like a load of photo ops.
Well, if you look at the last World Cup and the next World Cup in Mexico, USA and Canada, and the one after that in Morocco, Spain, Portugal, and then South America, I mean, that just looks crazy in terms of climate change, international travel. The Qatar World Cup, they claimed that they're going to be the greenest ever World Cup and all these sorts of carbon neutral things. It turned out to be complete nonsense.
It is odd.
Yeah, I think this is for a lot of world leaders, including sports leaders. The COP is just like a sort of a place where they can go and get pictured shaking hands with other world leaders, and I'm sure that's certainly what happened on Gianni Infantino's Instagram. And I wait to see any international sports body genuinely do something for green issues, because it's all very well to say we are committed to it, but you need something absolutely real and that you can see, rather than carbon offsetting or planting trees or whatever. I think you need to take a much more active role if you're going to take it seriously. If you're not, fine, just don't claim you are.
Yeah, I think we have seen Formula One attempt to move some of the events closer to each other. So the 2024 calendar does start in Bahrain, then goes nearby to Saudi Arabia, then to Australia, then Japan, China. Rather than, I think sometimes it's gone to Asia, then switched the other parts of the world, then back again. So that would point to addressing at least some of those travel sustainability issues.
Yeah, it's Formula One. The whole thing is that's a tricky one to start talking about green issues with Formula One, isn't it?
Yeah. So where's Gianni Infantino been as well this week?
Oh, he's been to. Well, I think it's the same jet. Looking at the travel there, I think he went to Indonesia, where the Under-17 World Cup was being played. Then took himself to Guam. Population 170,000. One of the recipients, like the other 211 members of FIFA's munificence over the years. So he played a game there. Then the jet took him, I think, to Miami, where Commonwealth was having its draw for the Copa America that we played in the US next summer. And again, another opportunity for photos and a game with football legends in Miami, and I guess the roadshow will carry on. It's just striking and perhaps a bit galling that for real people who are worried about climate change, environment, when these opportunities are taken advantage of, perhaps. Rob, some other news from FIFA this week. There was a written verdict in the Luis Rubiales case. What happened there?
Yeah, the full findings, and it gives a great insight into the case itself, running for dozens and dozens of pages. So you get to see the statements made by Rubiales, witness statements as well, and just how the disciplinary committee did form its verdict. So certainly this has been one of the priorities of FIFA's legal side. They have said in recent years to open up more to publish these verdicts, and it did give us an insight particularly into the testimony of the English FA chair, Debbie Hewitt, who certainly revealed what it was like being with Rubiales in Sydney at that World Cup final, which of course saw Spain beat England, and just what Rubiales' conduct was like, particularly in the tunnel as they were about to go out to the trophy presentation, where of course the non-consensual kiss on Jenny Hermoso by Rubiales eventually happened. And what Debbie Hewitt told FIFA was that Rubiales was unpleasant and unnecessarily aggressive. Then on the podium, he seemed to forcibly kiss Lucy Bronze, the England defender, on her face, and stroke the face of another England player, Laura Coombs. Rubiales told FIFA's disciplinary committee that Debbie Hewitt portraying him as some sort of a creep is absolutely disgusting, but FIFA ultimately came down on the side of the complainants when, of course, it banned Rubiales for 3 years from football.
Also interesting, I think it illustrated this idea, well, not idea. This practice of what happened is that the Spanish Federation's press officer was forced to sort of put out a statement, basically with stating that Jenny Hermoso had sort of cleared Rubiales of any sort of non-consensual act, which then proved completely wrong and sort of. I mean, actually, I think they later removed the statement from the website after Rubiales had been suspended.
Yeah, I must say the investigation, it shows that when they want to, FIFA can bring down the full weight of its investigation teams and complete an investigation like this rapidly and then publish the conclusion in fairly short order as well. It's something you'd like to see more of. This one was acted upon with such urgency and alacrity. You'd hope this was now the benchmark for all sorts of investigations at FIFA.
Well, moving completely onto a different subject now.
Bigger perhaps than any transfer, any club takeover, the deal that so many wait for in the football cycle is what happens with the Premier League's TV rights, and the domestic rights have now been settled in a new 4-year deal in the UK from 2025 to 2029. Sounds like a bit of the status quo, Martyn, but with so much behind it.
Yeah, so just give some details. 4 years instead of 3 years, 270 live matches instead of 200. And the total, it's basically a 4% increase in the live rights. So the total over 4 years is 6.7 billion pounds, I should say. Whether this is the first actual auction since 2018. So a lot of people seeing what's going to happen because across Europe there hasn't been that much movement at all. In fact, some of the major leagues have gone down. Sky are the biggest winners. They've got 4 of the 5 packages, 215 live matches. TNT Sports used to be BT Sports. That's staying the same, 52 matches. They're still paying the same, 325 million a year. And the BBC get the highlights. That stayed the same as well. That's basically 70 million a year for their match of the day. So it's I think there's sort of perhaps the clubs. Some clubs are happy now. They know they can plan for the next end of the decade. I think some of the bigger ones were hoping they might have got a little bit more because they're putting so many matches out there.
So, who best to unpack some of this with further? Francois Godard from Enders. Some of the brains behind analysing how much should be paid, how much they expect to be paid in these types of deals. So, Francois, welcome to Sports Unlocked. Is it a good deal for the Premier League, the clubs, the broadcasters? Who comes out best from it?
Robin, it may sound a bit boring, but yes, it's good for everybody. In the context of deflation everywhere, the league keeps its head above the water, and Sky has a better grip on the rights. And for the consumer, for the fan, I think it's better because, well, they will have more games, as Martyn said. They will have more games to watch on the telly, and there will be less fragmentation because Amazon is out. So we have only 2 broadcasters instead of 3.
Where is the Premier League's domestic rights now compared to La Liga, France, Ligue 1, Serie A, and Bundesliga? What are we talking about here?
Well, there's an enormous gap between the Premier League and rival leagues, and this gap is in terms of over 500 million with the Spanish league, La Liga, which is number 2, and the gap is steady, which is the most important thing, I think, for the Premier League, because thanks to this gap, they have the best show in global football, and thanks to this gap remaining steady or even increasing because of international sales, they are in this virtual circle where they improve the show, they get more demand. What is clear to me is that looking forward, growth will be international as opposed to domestic.
Why did Sky not try and drive a hard bargain Why were they happy to pay?
Well, I think Sky has proved since the very beginning. You remember that Rupert Murdoch supported the launch of the Premier League in the early 90s. Sky understands that a football game played in 2027 will be as good as the money you put on the table today. So a football game is not like buying a film from Hollywood. You buy the tape and you try to get the best bargain for it. And that's it. You show it and there's no change. Whereas a football game depends on its financing ahead. And Sky understands that. And Sky has shown not only in the UK, but also on the continent, say in Germany, where they are active over the years, that they want a very high quality product because they need this product and they invest in it. And I see continental broadcasters who don't seem to get that. They try to get the cheapest deal today, which is against their best interest.
But is there a cultural element to some of this in terms of British consumers seem maybe not happy, but content to be squeezed at these high price points, whereas in Germany, the German public would just walk away, presumably, if the subscription prices were to rise exponentially?
Good question. I would remind you that in Germany, near live highlights on free-to-air TV are much more extensive than what you get in the UK. So the pay TV proposition is a little bit less attractive. Then over the years, it's true that the German broadcasters have struggled to raise pay TV penetration, and Britain is a leading digital market. Before digital, Britain was a leading subscription TV market. So all of this work well together. Can I also add that the Bundesliga is less competitive than the Premier League? And so maybe in the past few years, the Bundesliga was not exciting enough for people to subscribe massively.
Arguably, the Premier League has never been so exciting this season. I mean, if you just look at the last 2 weekends when the deal was done, we're having, all manner of goals being scored, upsets, 3-3s, 4-3s, 2-2s, VAR, etc. The title, the top 8 teams haven't been this close, I think, since Leicester won the.
I should be more critical, but I see that the Premier League business model works very well.
One notable part of the new rights is one fewer player. With Amazon out of the picture, they had entered the market in 2019 by gaining the rights to 2 complete rounds of matches, the first time that had happened in the UK. But this time there are fewer packages that have been sold, only 5 packages, and Sky have secured the maximum allowed, which is 4 out of 5. And what do we make of this departure then of Amazon? We've seen in Australia this week, Amazon have picked up ICC World Cricket rights to show domestic broadcasts there. Around the world, we've seen Apple only want global rights. So what do we make of Amazon withdrawing then from Premier League rights?
Well, Robin, Amazon will broadcast 1 game per week of the Champions League in the UK from next September. And I think Amazon is happy with this model. They have Champions League games, 1 game per week, already in Germany and Italy. And they have 1 NFL game per week in the US. So Amazon is happy with that at this point. Doesn't mean that in the next stage, in the next cycle, they may not ask for more. Apple, it's a bit early those who had expectations with Apple were too impassioned. Apple started with sports in its main market, the United States, only last year. Give them time to learn a little bit. Same thing with Google. You know that Google bought the NFL Sunday Ticket, but it's only 1 year ago, and they started broadcasting in September. I wouldn't see them stepping in the UK at the prices we have at this point. But watch this space. I think that Google may be interested next time.
For international listeners to this podcast, might be surprised to know that some games that take place Saturday afternoons are not. They can't be shown in the UK live. There's just been this blackout. It's been there historically. The idea is to protect match attendances and also amateur football taking place there helps sort of create a sort of big moments. The Sunday night match, the Saturday night match. What do you think of this blackout?
Well, this is a British oddity, but again, it works pretty well because despite the blackout, brackets, in the other big 4 European leagues, all games are broadcast on TV, end of brackets. Despite this blackout, the Premier League is doing pretty well, and the Premier League can do these nice moves, just like they've just done. They just add more games, making the whole package a little bit more attractive and allowing Sky to tell its subscribers, you will get more. And so if they can keep it, why not? And there were talks this week of putting Women's Super League in that time slot. And I think from the whole industry's point of view, would be great.
Francois, thank you very much for joining us here on Sports Unlocked.
Good to get the thoughts of Francois, particularly on how women's football in England could gain its own distinctive slot, perhaps at 3:00 on a Saturdays when men's football dominates so much. Well, we have this week seen changes announced by UEFA to the Women's Champions League, with a new format coming in from 2025, replicating the new format for the men's game, this Swiss model, which puts all the teams into one league, and then it's the top teams that go through automatically, another lot go through playoffs. What is this format? How's it going to work? It's 18 teams, isn't it, instead of the 36 in the men? Each team's going to play 6 opponents.
Yeah, this is the Swiss model. Men's Champions League is also doing it from next season. I think it's quite interesting, this. I like the idea of it. So you have one giant league table, and the results from those 6 matches will go into forming this league table, which will then decide the knockout round. But this comes off the back of some complaints. I think it was Manchester United women's team coach about them not being in the Champions League and smaller clubs being there. Arsenal weren't in the Champions League. So, Tariq, you think were they right to complain?
Try not to get knocked out. I think that's the nature of competition. But on the merit of the Swiss competition, or the Swiss format you described, it's happening at exactly the same time as the men's, and there's a different degree of maturity of men's professional football and women's. Quite keen to see which one of them copes better with this new model. I think potentially the women's game will do a lot better out of this.
There's also, I thought, intriguingly, and thought this was really good, that UEFA is going to have a second tier competition for women's European women's competition, which is a straight knockout competition, a bit like the old UEFA Cup, which I think could be really good.
A lot more distinctive as a format.
A lot more distinctive, a lot more jeopardy, one and done. But then you might have clubs that Martyn described earlier complaining about not being in Europe after one game. Boo-hoo.
Something I was reporting on in the last week, pretty notable, something to keep an eye on going forward. I was at the High Court in London for a concussion case being brought by almost 300 rugby union players. We've had some of them named now. They are claiming rugby authorities were negligent, not protecting them against the prospect of long-term serious brain injuries. And the case rolls on into next year. No announcement or decision on a group action. No, some was a class action, with certainly quite a lot of discussion in the hearing last week over proving and establishing complete medical records.
Yeah, it's an intriguing one, Rob. I think they announced all the sort of names of the people taking part, and they some sort of household names that hadn't been known. This is a massively serious thing for rugby union, rugby league. It's sort of, it can have a sort of really decisive effect on the whole sport. American football went through this sort of quite painful process a few years ago, but I think for rugby it can be even worse because they're not rich. Rugby is not a rich sport like American football. This is really serious.
Quite a serious end to this week's pod. As ever, you can message us at Sport Unlocked on X, Facebook and Instagram. Your feedback, sportunlockedpod@gmail.com. But now, thank you for listening. Goodbye.